Hello and welcome to Virtues of Peace. My name is Hope Elizabeth May, and I'm joined by our longtime participant in this podcast, Randy Olson.
Hello, good to be back.
And also joining us from the Florence Nightingale Museum in London is Hannah Amos. Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, we're so honored to have you here. And what we're talking about today is the what I call the philosophical caregiving of someone you may have never heard of, Dame Cicely Saunders. And we can have many descriptions of her, but she's most known for being the founder of modern hospice. And even that phrase, hospice, a lot of people don't understand what that means. And so suffice it to say that Dame Saunders contributed so much to the improvement of, I'll call it our normative ecosystem, especially surrounding when we disappear from life, also known as death. This show is focused on the engaged philosophy of Dame Saunders. And it's important to remember that although she's known for being the founder of modern hospice, she's very much articulating a philosophy of life. And her philosophy of life, as we will discuss, does not ignore but fully incorporates the inevitability of death, suffering, and the need for meaning. So Dame Saunders has a number of essays, and in one of them called The Philosophy of Terminal Care, she writes about her philosophy, quote, "We are concerned with the nature of man, with living and dying, and with the whole man, body, mind, and spirit." And so Hannah Amos is here with us today because she, at the Florence Nightingale Museum in London, did the research for an exhibit that is currently on display on Dame Cicely Saunders. And this exhibit opened on July 14th of this year. This is 2025. And that was a significant day because that day marked the 20th anniversary of Dame Saunders' death in 2005. So July 14th. And Hannah, when do you think the exhibit will come down?
At the moment, we've got an end date of the 1st of March, 2026.
Wow, March 1st. And that date, March 1st, is a very important day for us at Virtues of Peace because it is a widely celebrated, it's a national holiday in South Korea because it marks the nonviolent uprising, shall we say, independence movement of March 1st, 1919, well before the country was divided. So that's an important date. So Hannah, in my research for this show, my understanding is that when you were doing the research for the Dame Saunders exhibit, your title was Collections Manager at the Florence Nightingale Museum. Is that correct?
Yes.
But now your title is the Perseverance Coordinator. Is that correct?
Perseverance Curator.
Perseverance Curator. And can you say more about that title and how that title changed your role at the Florence Nightingale Museum?
Yes. So I've actually worked at the museum for nearly 8 years now. I started off as front of house supervisor and have slowly worked my way up to now curator. In the last few years, I've been working as collections manager, which means I get to look after all of the collection we have, all of the objects that belong to Florence Nightingale, and everything associated with her legacy that we hold in the museum. And recently, my role has changed ever so slightly. I still look after all of the collection, but I am now going to be focusing a little bit more on engaging with those in higher education, so university students and things like that. Just because we have some money that was given to the museum a few years ago from an organisation called the Perseverance Trust, and that funding was directly to help us engage with higher education students. So that will mostly work within the sense of working with the nursing students about the history of nursing, but obviously that will have a much wider reach as well across the museum.
That's amazing. You've been at the Florence Nightingale Museum for a while now. Um, and why is there in the Florence Nightingale Museum an exhibit about Dame Cecily Saunders?
So the Dame Cicely Saunders exhibit is in a small little area right at the front of the museum. It was a little corner sort of poked away. And up until mid 2024, that section had a series of 10 really beautiful paintings, all from field hospitals of World War One, associated with the nursing that was taking place in those field hospitals. But they'd been there for 10 years and it was looking a little bit sad in that corner. It needed a little bit of a refresh. So that's where our idea of the In Focus series of exhibitions came from. And we started off with the Flying Nightingales because it was the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and this group of women went into France, flew across to France, and helped evacuate soldiers from the D-Day landings, that injured soldiers and things like that. After that, we had a huge long list of people that we wanted to cover. We initially went for Chief Cofferola Abini Pratt, who was a Nigerian lady, came to the UK, trained at the Nightingale Training School, and then on her return to Nigeria a few years later, she completely transformed the whole of nursing in Nigeria and has had such a huge legacy behind her. And when it came to choosing the next one, we sort of ummed and ahed over a few different people, but Dame Cicely had been on that list right from the very beginning, and we just knew we had to do her. There was just something so special about her. The main connection that we had with us at the Florence Nightingale Museum is that Dame Cicely actually trained to become a nurse at St Thomas's Hospital in the Nightingale Training School, which was opened by Florence Nightingale in 1860. So there was that real connection to us. She worked at St Thomas's. She'd done a lot of her social work training at St Thomas's Hospital, which is where we're based. And there was just multiple connections between her and us. And we just were enchanted with her story. It really kind of struck a chord with all of us. And then following on doing research, we realised that 2025 would be the 20th anniversary of her death, and it just all fell into place from there, really. That was about the time we wanted to open the next exhibition. So the 14th of July, her death date, was actually the day we launched the exhibition and opened it. So it was such a special occasion for us. We had actually, in the course of our research, made a connection with St Christopher's Hospice, the hospice she set up. So they were very involved from the beginning, and a few other people came to the launch. And yeah, we've set off this real lovely relationship with St Christopher's, which hopefully will go much longer beyond this exhibition.
That's amazing. And is she well known? And I mean, she's basically not really known in the United States. I learned about her through a book that was then made into a documentary called Cancer, quote, the or colon, the Emperor of All Maladies. And that in that book, Cecily's contributions are discussed. But is she known in the UK, like by the average person, in your view?
Not particularly. I think to a certain extent she's known of people who have that connection either with hospices or end of life care, that kind of thing. Especially within health workers, people will kind of go, "Oh, I know that name." Can't quite think what she did, but know of her. But I'd say across the general sort of public, there's not that much awareness of her. So that is our goal, to tell these people's stories and just tell them to the widest amount of people as possible. So, so yeah, hopefully we've taught a lot more people about Dame Cicely Saunders.
Great.
In the spirit of that, can I ask a question? Hannah, I was wondering if you could help elucidate the relationship between the Nightingale Museum's physical presence in a medical establishment, for an American audience. Like, how do these institutions relate to each other? Because I think that story adds a layer of complexity here that is meaningful and interesting.
Yes, so so we're tucked away in a basement at St Thomas's Hospital, which is not the most natural place for a museum, but we have such a strong connection with St Thomas's Hospital. So the reason we're in that basement is after the Crimean War, when Nightingale returned home. Obviously, she was world famous. People knew about her from all of the work she'd done in the Crimean War, and a fund had been set up that was meant to be a bit of a thank you to her. But this fund ended up being in the thousands of pounds, which today is something crazy like £4 million or something like that. And Nightingale basically said, "Can we use this money to create a training school?" And that became the first ever training school in the world, really. There had been similar kind of institutions before, mostly associated with deaconesses or other religious houses, but this was secular, so not religious in any way. And it was set up at St Thomas's Hospital. And so that was 1860 when it first opened, and the school remained opened at the hospital right the way through to the 1990s when it merged with King's College London, which is the university just down the road from us. But the reason why we've stayed there is because one of the matrons of the school in the 1920s, she started collecting objects that were associated with Nightingale. And these would occasionally go on display. They'd be used by the trainee nurses for teaching tools. But by the 1970s, they were like, "We've got such a collection, we need to create something to house this collection in." And that's when the Florence Nightingale Museum Trust was born. And we opened sort of 10, 15 years later in the 1980s, and we've been there ever since. So we have such a strong connection with the location and the training school. That's where we're born from. And it's just, we can't have one without the other, really.
I love that. Thank you.
So, as I said in the beginning, the sort of bumper sticker that Dame Saunders has is the founder of modern hospice. And we're going to be going more deeply into what that means. But just to get us started, Hannah, we have a page of quotes, actually, and if you're interested in this page of quotes, you can access them on our show resources page at virtuesofpeace.com. And this is just a small quote that describes a little bit the contribution that Dame Saunders is engaged in. So if you could read that quote, Hannah.
"Progressive and mortal illnesses have not had the accommodation nor the research devoted to them that has been given to acute, remediable conditions, nor are the needs of those who suffer from such illnesses commonly well met in busy general hospitals. The situation of chronic pain, so different in character, expectation, and meaning from the events of acute pain, has received little attention until recently."
Thank you. And this last sentence, "the situation of chronic pain, so different in character, expectation, and meaning from the events of acute pain, has received little attention until recently." And so we'll talk about it more later, but this really paying attention to pain and all of its dimensions, especially at the end of life, is one of the contributions of Dame Saunders that really nobody was paying attention. And so she decided that this needs to be done and did it. So let's just talk a little bit about the exhibit that is currently at the Florence Nightingale Museum on Dame Saunders. And this is the In Focus exhibit, as you have described it. And the In Focus, that's a series of exhibits on other personalities from nursing history.
Yes, we're trying to cover different people who have followed Nightingale's path, improving nursing, improving medical care. They don't need to be fully connected to Nightingale, but just, really sort of progressing that art of nursing.
Can you just describe the general layout of the exhibit?
Yes, so we have, Dame Cicely is the third one, so they're still quite new, but each one has had 7 panels, which basically start with a bit of an introduction to the person. Second panel tends to cover sort of early life and a bit about childhood and sort of the background of that person, as it does with Dame Cicely. And then the third panel for Dame Cicely then launches into her work at the Nightingale Training School, why she ended up going there, which was mostly because of the Second World War. She wanted to make sure she was giving her own sort of resources to help war effort, which is why she decided to train as a nurse. And then, unfortunately, due to ill health, she had to give up on the nursing, which is why she then decided to go into the social work element of her life. The fourth panel of the exhibition very much looks at a very pivotal patient to her ideas that will come in her later life. And this really sort of is the start of her work on the introduction of the hospice movement and palliative care. The fifth panel talks more about her work that she did to improve these ideas that she had, really starting to write them down on paper. And, this is where she starts to think about her total pain ideas. This is also the time where she actually decides that in order to push these ideas forward and actually to ensure she's listened to and can actually do everything to the best of her ability, she decides that actually she's going to train as a doctor. And she then comes back to St Thomas's at that point, trains as a doctor, and this is where she then really starts to put her ideas together on the palliative care movement that she puts together. The sixth panel is then on her work at her own hospice that she set up, St Christopher's, which is in South East London. We look at the principles that she ran this place on and sort of the work that went into actually getting that founded in the first place. And then finally in the last panel, we look at the end of her own life. So across her life, she received so much recognition for the work she did. She was given a damehood, hence Dame Cicely Saunders. She was given the Order of Merit. She had many other degrees and things and honours that were given to her. And then very finally, we look at the last few weeks of her life. She unfortunately ended up getting cancer herself, which is the illness she'd worked with for such a long time. But she was she was okay with that. She'd worked with it her whole life. So, it gave her time to sort her affairs, I think is how she viewed it. And in the last few weeks of her life, when she really did start to slow down, she actually moved from her house just around the corner from St Christopher's into St Christopher's, which is where she passed away on the 14th of July 2005. Sorry. And it's just sort of became full circle, really, that's where she ended her days, sort of this place that she sort of dedicated her whole life to.
And isn't she buried also at St Christopher's?
Yes, so her and her husband's ashes are interred in the garden at St Christopher's as well. So she remains there.
I mean, her story is so amazing. Can you talk about the research that you had to do to create this exhibit?
Obviously, as I said, it's quite a small space, so the level of information we can actually put into the exhibition is very kind of headline, which always seems such a shame. I think I could have written a full large-scale exhibition about Dame Cicely. But most of my research, I used David Clarke's Cicely Saunders, A Life and Legacy, which is, I think it was published in 2018, so it's a fairly recent book. But David Clarke personally knew Cicely, and most of his work on the book came from his own interviews that he did with Cicely in her later years. They were all recorded, and he was able to use those then for his own research and writing and putting this book together. So this is from someone who knew her, it's a really personal kind of reflection on her life. I was also able to visit the archives at King's College London, because they hold her full archive there, all of her papers and quite a few of belongings as well. And they also have a fantastic website available online as well, the Dame Cicely Saunders Archive, which has got a lot of images and things and information about some of the pieces they've got there. Obviously, there's quite a lot of the archive that's actually is not allowed to be viewed by the public, because it does have patient records in, and obviously it's fairly recent, so a lot of it is put to one side and can't be viewed, but there are a lot of other her sort of personal paperwork that can be viewed. And then finally, I think the sort of highlight for me, I actually got the opportunity to go to St Christopher's, myself and one of my colleagues. We went there through the connections we'd made with them, and they showed us around some of the sort of main areas, and you can really see Dame Cicely's spirit throughout the whole building. There's been new build sort of extensions since her passing, but that original building still stands. It's the main entrance where you go in. You know, they've got her husband's artwork all over the walls. It's just, you really get that sense of her and what she was trying to achieve. And I think for me, that was one of the sort of biggest sort of bits, and actually kind of put it into perspective of what we were talking about in the exhibition, and what the sort of whole kind of spirit of the idea was.
That's so profound. And I will put on the show resources page links to the archive at King's College of Dame Cicely Saunders, as well as a link to St. Christopher's. And I'm pretty sure that you can do a virtual tour on their website. And so if you're interested, I would, check that out. I will put that on the show resources page. Can you talk about one or two highlights, perhaps a specific paper or an object that you came across that really resonated with you?
Yes. So in the archive, I mean, the main reason I was visiting was because we were hoping to be able to borrow some of the objects that they had in the archive to actually put on display. And I think one of the most impactful ones for me was it was a typewritten paper, but it did actually have handwritten notes on it, which she'd put on herself. It obviously, she'd typed it up and then, was just rereading through it later. But it's a document called The Scheme, and this was her outline for St Christopher's before St Christopher's existed. She in the 1950s, in the 1950s, when she was starting to put these ideas together, she was going through her medical training. She literally just wrote the scheme at one point, and it outlines everything she wants her home for the terminally ill to be. And that is what St Christopher's became sort of 10 or so years later. And that was a really, really kind of meaningful document that that I came across, and we've actually have got that on display in the museum. One of the other things that we also borrowed from King's College London and the archive is a very small last rites kit, and this was Dame Cicely's herself. It's a very small little leather case, and then inside there's a tiny silver chalice, a little bottle with a silver cap, a tiny silver plate, and then a dish, a little kind of trinket dish almost that you'd have had the communion wafers in. And, this, I could just sort of visualize her holding this and having it with her just in case there was, in people's last moments, they did want to take communion. And this, for me, and I think for a lot of our visitors as well, it's a really sort of meaningful object that we've got, and it really just shows how important her religion was to her, and sort of that sort of foundation of the home, having that kind of religious side to it was so important to her, and that sort of spiritualness that she brought to it.
That's amazing. So these objects, the scheme and the last rites kit, you said they're part of the exhibit. So are they in like a case for people to view?
Yes, so at the end of the exhibition space, by the sort of fourth end panel, the we have two display cases for this one actually, because we had so many objects that we were able to bring another case into the space. So one, we've got a tall case with three shelves that's got a lot of her objects in, so that's got the last rites kit in, and a photograph of her that we actually have in our collection of when she was doing her training, and a couple of other documents and bits that she sort of her publications and things like that. And then we've got another flat top case, so it's just some paperwork in the bottom, and in that we've got the scheme, we've got an architectural drawing of St Christopher's dated from the 1960s, and a couple of other objects relating to those early days of St Christopher's. And then on the right hand side of that case, we've got a lot of modern literature from St Christopher's, so things that they give out to families and patients today, sort of explaining their processes and why they do what they do, and just trying to explain everything as clear and as upfront as they can. So we've got a lot of objects from the from modern day St Christopher's, lots of things that they use for their fundraising because they are a charity. So just badges and lanyards and things. They also use lots of other kind of ways to fundraise to keep them open. One particular staff favourite is there's actually a little dog bandana that the little dogs can wear on their walks and things. So that one's really cute.
So you may have talked about this a little bit already, but just to reframe the question. Are there any particular interesting stories connected to researching the exhibit that you would like to share?
I think for me, the sort of thing I really like to get across about her is just that real multifaceted approach that she had to life. So, she trained as a nurse. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to continue that just because she had issues with her back and she wasn't able to lift patients and things like that. That's then when she turned to the social work, what was known as an almoner. And she saw the social needs that people that needed, people needed help in terms of, paying for their care. This is just about pre-NHS in the UK. So people would need to pay for their care. So she's helping with that. She's seeing, the situation that people are living in, how, illness is affecting people's daily lives. And she's trying to work out how she can help them in those situations. And then obviously she becomes a doctor and has that real kind of medical insight as well. She really has that full range of experience that I think gives her such a unique way of looking at things. She there's not many other people who have had all three of those careers and gone through all three of those lots of training, and it just meant she really could understand everything that might be going on with someone who was going through a terminal illness.
Amazing. So is that appreciating the complexity of her point of view or her frame? Is that the most important thing that you walk away with after working on this exhibit?
It was a very important part. But I think the actual really important thing I've taken away from this, sort of on a real kind of personal level, is just learning more about palliative care. It's not really something that's spoken about. Not many people are aware of it unless you're sort of directly involved with it in any way, or have had to kind of go through that with family members or friends. It's such a recent thing. She set up St Christopher's, it opened in 1967. It's so recent in the grand scheme of things, and just not taking that for granted. And I think just really that shift in attitude towards those who are sort of nearing the end of their life, and just giving them that quality of life is so important. There's actually a quote that I really like that I'd like to say as well. You matter because you are you, and you matter to the end of your life. We will do all we can, not only to help you die peacefully, but also to live until you die. And I think that for me sums her up beautifully.
So I'm mostly interested in just understanding the way these exhibits, like, is there just a rotation, or how did this come about from a practical, like when did this exhibit begin? In your world, as part of you bringing it to life and bringing it into the museum and all that. Like there's a story there, I'm sure.
Yeah. So these smaller in focus exhibitions, they generally last actually in their physical form in the museum for about 6 months. Occasionally we'll extend them for a little bit longer, 7 or 8 months. So they're very short in terms of the lifespan of an exhibition. And that means we do sort of 2 a year. Sometimes we'll end up doing 3 a year, depending on how the sort of how it falls within the year, I suppose. This one, it started about a year ago in December 2024. We were literally just coming to the end of all the design work for the previous one, which was opening in January 2025. So we barely even finished the last one before we're already thinking about the next one. And it's sort of that never-ending cycle of deep diving one subject, and then you do all the writing, you almost forget about it for a bit, and then it appears in the museum, but then it appears, but you've moved straight on to the next one. Deep diving somebody else's life and a different time period, so it is a very sort of fast turnover. We've also got another exhibition space in the museum, which is a slightly longer one, so that goes on for a year or so. So again, all of these things are going on at the same place. So I've had to do my homework a little bit for Cicely today, because it's been a while since I looked at her sort of overall story. I mean, she's very hard to forget, so I didn't have to do too much homework. But we've put another whole exhibition on since then, and we're already knee deep in the next in focus as well. So it's very, very, very kind of quick turnover.
Yeah, and I'm asking and bringing this up largely to highlight the organic nature of these things, and how the subject matter seems to just click into place in a way that's spectacularly magnificent and beautiful. And so it's like I'm trying to see that story from as many different angles as I can. So I know that the focus on the material is what I want to do and get back to that, but I'm obsessed with those kinds of, like, how did this happen sort of narratives.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just had seen her name a few different times in different things, and say we've got a photograph of her in our collection. We knew she was a Nightingale nurse. And yeah, her name just kept coming up. And
the fact of the anniversary of her death.
Yeah. Yeah, and we try and plan our exhibition program sort of 2 or 3 years in advance, but sometimes things come up that you just kind of go, hang on, this is fantastic, or if we don't do this now, we've kind of missed the opportunity. So we can, because we are such a small museum, we can be quite reactive to sort of what happens around us. Big museums will have their exhibition program planned for probably 5 to 10 years. And it's very set in stone. Whereas because I'm the only curator, I'm the only collections person, we've, got one director. So, the two of us kind of, if something comes up, we just go, yeah, we think this is what we should do next, and just sort of wait for that moment, really. Obviously, our board of trustees have to approve everything. We can't just start going off and writing about whatever we like. But we very much just kind of see what circumstances are going on, and who we meet, what comes up. There's always something that will come up and we'll be like, yes, this is what we need to do now.
Well,
Very
thank
cool.
you. Yeah, that's exactly what I was hoping would have. That's exactly what I was hoping. And so anyway, just pulling back to Cicely Saunders, and I'm under the impression that there's an interesting story around the Saunders, like the first patient. Could you unpack that and help and teach me a little?
Yes, so there is a gentleman whose name is David Tasma. He was um, someone that Dame Cicely came across during her time working at St Thomas's while she was a social worker. I think, I'm trying to remember all the facts, but I think she came across him at St Thomas's. He was then released home, but she had met him and he'd made an impact on her. So she actually went to visit him at his home after he'd been discharged from hospital. And it was at that point she realised, as a Polish Jewish immigrant to the UK, he had friends around him, he had neighbours, but he didn't have any family. And over the next few weeks, she literally would go and visit him as much as she could. And she'd just talk with him. That's all it ever was. She'd just talk to him, tell him, about what was going on with his own illness, let him talk, just listen to him, but was very honest with him about his outlook in terms of, the fact that he did have a terminal illness and, the end was coming. But he really did appreciate her openness and honesty with him on that. And I think that really changed his perspective. And it was David that then would basically influence Dame Cicely for the rest of her life. It's sort of his impact on her and that interaction that they had for these very few short weeks that, basically forged her on the path towards palliative care, the hospice movement. She actually received some money from him in his will. He changed his will and he gave her some money. And it's with the instructions that I will be a window in your home. So they'd obviously discussed a little bit about Cicely's ideas, and he really sort of thought that, if he left her a bit of money, that would push her down this path that she'd obviously been thinking about a little bit. But that was the catalyst for the rest of her life, basically.
Yes, and I just want to, pause here because for some time we're going to be talking about David Tasma and the way that he influences Cicely's philosophy of hospice. And we have a bunch of materials here to get through. And one is a quote. And this quote, so we're coming at this story in a couple of different ways. It's such an important story, and we want our listeners to really pause for thought and think about this encounter between Dame Saunders and David Tasma. Repeatedly, she credits him and the conversations with him as really informing her that this needs to be done. And then, of course, the story that you've shared, Hannah, how he leaves her money in his will. So if you could read, again, this quote is on our show resources page. There's a PDF of quotes. And this quote is from an essay that Dame Saunders writes called The Evolution of Palliative Care. And just to sort of flag, you're going to hear three principles that we'll be talking about. The commitment to openness, principle number 1. Principle number 2 is mind together with heart. And principle number 3, the commitment to the freedom of the spirit. These three principles, these three commitments are at the core of her philosophy. So, Hannah, over to you to read, please.
2 phrases he used in our long talks formed for me the challenge I came to believe I had to respond to. Referring to a small legacy of £500, he said, "I will be a window in your home," and again, "I want what is in your mind and in your heart." The first phrase gave us all a commitment to openness. Openness to and from the world, to all who would come and to all future challenges. From the second, although at the time it was a very personal exchange, came the commitment to everything of the mind. Research, learning, full scientific rigour, always matched with the friendship of the heart, the vulnerability of one person before another. After he died, having made a private peace with the God of his fathers, I had the assurance that he had made his journey with his own quiet dignity in the freedom of the spirit. So openness, mind together with heart, and the freedom of the spirit are the three founding principles, not only of St. Christopher's Hospice, but now of a worldwide movement. David Tasma, the Polish Jew who thought he had made no impact on the world by his life, started a movement founded on the Judean-Christian ethic, which has shown it can flourish in different cultures, each initiative with its own characteristics, but with the common aim that people should be helped not only to die peacefully, but to live until they die with their needs and their potential met as fully as possible.
Thank you very much. I'm also going to play two different clips. One is from Cicely Saunders herself, and you can watch this whole clip on our show resources page. She doesn't mention David Tasma by name in this clip, but she does talk about this story. So this is the Cicely Saunders clip from 1974, an interview. I think his name is David Frost, the BBC interview.
As it happened, the patient that I first met, who really opened the field up to me, was a young man of 40 who had cancer and was in a very large surgical ward, 50 beds. He was a lonely person, he was Polish, he was from the Warsaw Ghetto, and he had no relations and very few friends. And there he was with distress that needed to be helped. But also, he needed to understand something about himself and about life, so he wasn't just, as it were, leaving, having done nothing, no ripple on the pool, and he'd go. He needed something to work out in himself as to who he was. And he was also, at that time, an atheist, and he needed to make his peace, which indeed he did. And it seemed to us, we spent a long time talking together, the two of us, over a period of about 2 months, the ideas of somewhere that was more between a hospital and a home, where one could look and specialize in this particular kind of pain, would have given a place for him and for other people like him. So he left me £500 and he said, I'll be a window in your home.
I'm going to play one more clip, and this is of David Clark, who Hannah mentioned before. David Clark was the person who knew Cicely personally. He is really her biographer. In addition to that book, I'm virtually certain that he's the editor of the collected writings of Cicely Saunders. But this is David Clark speaking about the encounter between Cicely and David Tasma.
When she had newly qualified as a social worker, and when on her very first day at work, she encountered a dying Polish patient who was had arrived in Britain just as the World War II was beginning, and who, by the end of the war, having lived rather on the margins of society in London, was hoping to establish a new life, maybe go back to Poland or maybe stay and make a contribution to British society, but who found, he was age 40 at the time, his name was David Tasma, that he had an inoperable cancer. And it was at this moment that Cicely encountered him, and she stayed with him from the period of summer 47 through to February 48, visiting him regularly, seeing him in the outpatients department at St. Thomas's, and then visiting him when he was admitted for his final admission, not to St. Thomas's, but to the Archway Hospital in London. The important thing about this encounter that Cicely had over those months was that she began to dig deep into what was troubling David Tasma. Yes, he had cancer. Yes, he had some symptoms, though in fact not many. But the real things that were troubling him were a kind of social, spiritual, psychological pain based in the fact that he left his family just before the war began in Poland. He didn't return. He'd lost his connection with his Jewish faith, and he was deeply troubled in all sorts of ways as the end of his life approached.
Okay, so those were two clips, and again, we are pivoting in this conversation, and our pivot point is the encounter between Cicely and David Tasma. And as Hannah read that quote, there's a couple of things that we're going to go into. One are these 3 commitments to openness, mind together with heart, and freedom of the spirit. And we're going to unpack those commitments. But I also just want to, put a pin in it, if you will, this notion of this different kind of pain that David Clark is talking about. This we can call it mental pain, we can call it spiritual pain. I think it matters what we call it. But there's 2 things that we'll be talking about, these 3 commitments, and then this philosophy of pain that Dame Saunders is really pioneering. So first, to go into these 3 commitments, one by one, and this commitment to openness. What does she mean by that? And I found a quote in her Templeton Prize acceptance speech. This is in 1981 that I'm going to read. And she says here that because our commitment is to infinitely diverse individuals, we have had to learn flexibility and openness, the importance of listening and silence before, often instead of, any words at all. So included in this commitment to openness is this listening and silence, and not using any words at all. And this importance of listening, she refers to several times, the importance of just listening and being there. We'll talk about this phrase that she uses repeatedly, watch with me. But another hint at what she means by this commitment to openness is also this commitment to really tolerance and diversity of lives that she's encountering, without prejudice, and just listening and being open to the particular life that is in front of her. This is what she means by the commitment to openness. And I wanted, if any, either Hannah or Randy, you want to add to this commitment to openness, what it means.
So one of the ways I've framed this in my life, which has been useful, has been this concept map of having a space for someone. And I'm obsessed with function and how things occur, and so this function of holding a space for someone, and this framing of watching with me, it's the same idea, just coming from a different direction. And I've always found that there's immense psychological value in being able to just hold a place for someone where they can be human in that place without chains holding them down, without their own baggage, it's just this other place to step into temporarily. And that place is where Cicely is pointing people to watch. And so I'm just talking about it from the other direction, and that's where I go.
And elsewhere she talks about how really in order to hold this space for another person in the way that you're talking about, you have to be very present in yourself, and you have to be able to sit there and not contaminate the space with your worries and your biases and so forth. And I think that takes work to do such a thing. But going back to the quote that Hannah read, when she says this commitment to openness, again, it's openness to and from the world, to all who would come and to all future challenges. there's a lot in that sentence. It's not just, like holding space for the person, but there's like this project that she is trying to bring into the world. And so open to the challenges and carry on with the vision, with the scheme. So commitment to the mind together with heart is the second principle, the second commitment. And again, going back to the quote that Hannah read, so this is from a time of very personal exchange, and from this came the commitment to everything of the mind, research, learning, full scientific rigor, always matched with the friendship of the heart, the vulnerability of one person before another. This reminded me of the very famous, concept that you will find in Buddhism, wisdom and compassion. Wisdom and compassion. And so this wisdom and this scientific rigor and the intellect and knowledge, but also always with the heart. Both are equally important, so important. I think that kind of speaks for itself, this commitment to mind together with heart. Does anybody have anything else to add about that commitment?
I think that that's become much more well understood nowadays. I think that when this was being written and, Dame Cicely was around, it was less of a pervasive, like this was a more explosive idea at the time, but has become instantiated into the zeitgeist more.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yes, and I'll just put a pin in that because another notion that she's really pioneering that we're about to get to, but I'm just putting a pin in it now, some foreshadowing, is this notion of pain that is not like it's all bodily. It depends what your philosophy of mind is. But we make a distinction between like physical injury and emotional abuse, or what's called moral injury. And that's coming into the zeitgeist as well. But I think that Cicely Saunders and this mind together with heart is really ahead of her time, and she's ahead of her time in articulating these different kinds of pain, and one having to do with the mind or the spirit, which we'll get into. But and fittingly, this last commitment, I think, took me a minute to understand what she means by this commitment to the freedom of the spirit. This is her third commitment. And again, to go back to the quote that Hannah read, here's where she talks about it. After he died, having made a private peace with the God of his fathers, I had the assurance that he made his journey with his own quiet dignity in the freedom of the spirit. And elsewhere, she talks about the freedom of the spirit. Here's a couple of more quotes. Number one, quote, his personal journey into peace gave the demand for space and for freedom of spirit and facing the mystery of death. And then number two, this freedom is to be used, as we have seen many times over, used in time for family reconciliations, in deepening relationships, and in all the sorting out of beliefs and memories that can help others say, my bags are packed, I can go with a tranquil heart at any moment. So the way that I understand this freedom of the spirit, it go like all of these commitments or these principles work together. Commitment to openness, commitment to mind together with heart, commitment to freedom of the spirit. And I think the freedom of the spirit and openness are like, there's this like what I call a bundle concept. They're all part of this bundle. And as you were saying before, Randy, this commitment to openness is like giving someone space so they can just be. And this freedom of the spirit is similar to that, but this is what I hear her saying is that at the end of life, you need to give people this space so that they can, quote, sort out. I love that. They can like sort out and they can go through their life and figure out what's important so that they have a like a kind of narrative of meaning that allows them to go out in peace. And that's how she does describe David Tasma. It's on some of the quotes on the quote page on our show resources page that like she says, he's an atheist and he's in a lot of spiritual pain, but through their conversations, he works out and he remembers conversations that he had with his grandfather, who was a rabbi, and he's coming to like, he's working with these memories and he's, quote, sorting out. And so this commitment to the freedom of the spirit is this like giving space to someone so they can like work it out, whatever that may mean for a person, whether it involves reconciliation or remembering things like conversations with your grandfather. But this giving space is so that this person can work out, that the spirit can work out what it needs to work out before it goes on or whatever it does.
So I'll just add two interesting reflections there. I really appreciate Pope John's "My bags are packed." Like, this visual for me is super helpful, because like when if you're going to the airport, you got to load your luggage, right? You got to think carefully about what's going to go in, and you need to decide, and you have to make some commitments, and you have to leave things behind. And so anyway, the luggage metaphor really hits home for me. And then the second is, and I guess it's related actually. It's just this idea that you can't take much with you. So you have to be really diligent about what you organize and prepare as you're preparing, as you're getting ready to leave. You have to be very diligent about what you're bringing with you psychologically. And so the fact that there's a concentration on that is spectacularly important.
Right. So these three commitments that we have been like, this is what modern hospice, like this is the philosophy that Dame Saunders pioneers, again, through this encounter with David Tasma. These three commitments, and we could say more about them. I want to actually stick with freedom of the spirit for a second, because also, and I've mentioned this earlier, this phrase that she uses repeatedly, watch with me. And so this space that you're allowing someone to sort out, work through, distill what's important, like going on a trip, as we've been talking about, Randy. And when she talks about this phrase, watch with me, she says this repeatedly, this is a quote, "A good deal of suffering needs to be lived through." So this like working through the baggage, if you will, and she says this repeatedly, is actually like encountering painful memories or painful episodes. And like there's a phrase that we use, the zeitgeist, as we've been talking about, the only way out is through. That sitting with, watching and sitting with this person work out this pain is part of the thing, like involved in packing the bags. And this is just incredibly, like, to me, it just rings true. And Hannah, when we were talking about this podcast a couple weeks ago, I said, this is so amazing because St. Christopher's doesn't go up until 1967. She doesn't start to have these ideas until she encounters David Tasma, 1947, 1948. And human beings have been dying for a long time. And that it's not until 1967 that someone comes up with a more humane, like total packet. Like we're not just a body, we're a body and a spirit. And it's not until 1967 that someone actually realizes, I need to do something in like the medical community so that this is dealt with. I just think that's amazing.
Yeah, I think how did it go so long without someone having this idea? And there are Dame Cicely works at homes for the dying poor, but they are just nuns looking after people until they pass away. And I mean, it's great work that they're doing, but they are just they either drug them up to a point where they don't really know what's going on. That's where the term the Brompton cocktail comes from. It's, they just give them a whole kind of cocktail of medication to just drug them up. But or they kind of just pray for their sins, and while both of them will help in certain areas of what Cicely's looking at, they don't deal with the whole. And yeah, there's thousands of years of just people passing away without any of this full package of care. And yeah, it should just make us really grateful for what we do have for today.
Absolutely. And the exhibit, the 7-banner exhibit, the 5th banner, as you discussed earlier, includes what I call a concept map. And you can look at this map on our show resources page. It's so good. A concept map of, you used the phrase before, Hannah, total pain. And this is another bump, like if you go deeper into Dame Saunders, so bumper sticker 1 is founder of modern hospice. Bumper sticker number 2 is pioneer of the concept of total pain. And there's this map or this picture, this drawing that is included in your exhibit. And again, I strongly encourage you to look that up at our show resources page. Can you talk about that image, Hannah, how you found it and why you included it in the exhibit?
This is actually one of the first things I came across, really, on the Dame Cicely Saunders Archive website. There were a few images, say there were ones of her in her training school days. There was one of her nursing certificate, and then this, which I, as a historian, I love archival paperwork and things like that, and just actually seeing people's own handwriting and the documents that they've left behind. Obviously, I mostly deal with Florence Nightingales, but that's something I really am interested in. And as much as it is a very scribbly writing, and some of it is a little bit hard to read unless you really kind of zoom right in and work out what they say, it really just, to me, it just really made sense of her ideas of what she called total pain. There's 2 sections of the diagram. The first one is body. So in this, she is literally looking at what mostly would have been dealt with prior to sort of her ideas coming to the forefront of, that physical pain and any other kind of physical side effects of an illness that someone's got. She talks about pain. Someone might have a cough. They might have trouble with their bowels, and their eyes. They might have sight issues, hearing issues. There's all these physical things that can cause someone distress. But then the second section, she then actually starts to delve into the other side of her idea of total pain, which is that there is emotional distress, there's social distress, and there's spiritual distress, and all of this kind of forms this one big package of things that need to be addressed. If someone is terminally ill, it must be terrifying. You're going to be really scared, and if someone's not being honest with you about your prognosis or things like that, it's going to be such a scary situation. You're not going to fully understand what's going on around you. If you've had to go into some sort of hospital or clinic somewhere, you're away from your friends and family. There's that emotional side of things. You're not seeing your loved ones, or there's the alternative where you might not have that support structure around you of your friends and family. And then the spiritual distress. You might think doctors have abandoned you, your family's abandoned you, but then people might think that God's abandoned them. Why is this happening to me? So this whole kind of diagram that she sort of looks to me kind of, there's sort of some of it's crossed out, some of it's in different color pen. It really does feel like her thoughts are just being sort of thrown down onto the page. And yeah, as I say, this was one of the first things I saw, and I just knew it had to be included because it's just for me, it really sums up this idea of total pain and just all of these things that can be going on inside someone's head or in their body. And, you know, if someone can look at that and think, oh, actually, yes, someone is feeling, they're scared, they've got fear, you know, is that the fear of the pain? Is that the fear of death? Is that they're just not coping? You know, that they worried about their sins they've committed in their life? You know, there's all these things that, you know, she identified that need to be addressed. Like you say, you know, that spiritualness and sort of bringing everything together and packing your suitcase towards the end of your life, like all of this really kind of sort of all comes into one and gives that overall view of a person as a human being with thoughts, feelings, you know, and all the other kind of emotions and things that are going on.
Yeah. And as we said before, this is so progressive for the time forward thinking, because again, as I mentioned before, like today, it's pretty standard to talk about emotional injury, moral injury, and she is mapping out that there's this, and if you look at the picture, the drawing, she uses, you know, there's bodily pain, and then the other is, she calls it, you know, mind or mental pain. And I found it fascinating that I don't see anywhere on this map meaninglessness, which is something she talks about repeatedly in her other writings. And my guess is that this map is created before she encounters Viktor Frankl's work that we've talked about on this show before, his very famous book that is really like his witness during his time at Auschwitz, and how to keep the spirit intact and survive when you're in a most horrible situation. And you can, and you have to connect it to meaning in some way. So that's Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, and she refers to Viktor Frankl numerous times in her writings, and in, I think it's her article Spiritual Pain, she has just like a subheading in that called Facing Meaninglessness or Meaninglessness, but it's not on this original image. And so I'm thinking that she's writing this before Frankl. Frankl gives her like more vocabulary, if you will, to talk about the ailments of the spirit. And like, for example, I think like meaninglessness is its own spiritual pain. And I was actually talking with my husband last night about this, and he said spiritual means religious. And I said, well, no, it doesn't. And we were looking at this outline together, and I read this quote. I'm going to read, this is from her essay, The Modern Hospice. We feel as a team that spiritual encompasses more than religious, involving the meaning and purpose of life as defined by the patient and family, which may or may not include God. To meet a dying person's spiritual needs may therefore mean helping him to sift through and sort out what has been meaningful in his life. So I think we're seeing like a working out of a broader notion of spiritual that doesn't include religious, although she's clearly very religiously motivated, but she is putting forth this notion of spiritual that is not connected to a specific religion and is connected to this need for meaning, which that is what Viktor Frankl is sort of, that is his bumper sticker. And so like spiritual pain, which meaningless is a part of it, it's not the only kind of spiritual pain. So like, do you feel fear if you're suffering from the pain of meaninglessness? I mean, maybe. It doesn't seem to be essential, but it's, anyway, I think working out all of these different terms is something very useful that she's doing. So yeah, my to put a bow on it, if you will, um, she begins this conceptual journey of articulating there's physical and emotional, mental, spiritual pain that need to be dealt with at the end of life. And included in that mental, emotional, spiritual pain is a very specific pain called meaninglessness. That I think David Tasma is dealing with that sort of thing because he is an atheist, and it's not clear that he can come up with any meaning until he starts to dialogue with Dame Saunders.
Well, I'll jump in there because I think that one of the most beautiful things about this for me so far, and I'm just, I'm at like the second step on the ladder of this particular story, so I'm still really just learning it. But the thing that's spectacularly beautiful about it is that by the end, it does sound like David has found some of the peace and tranquility that goes along with a successful end of life, sorting outing. I don't know what verb to use there. But yeah, like he has sorted everything out and he's come to terms with the meaning coming through legacy and doing good work in the world and finding a way to contribute and give back. Like that comes perfectly full circle in the most spectacularly direct way. And so I don't know, it's amazing to me that this one story pulls it all together so neatly.
Absolutely.
I think just to follow on from that, I think that really is evidenced in St. Christopher's today. I'll be a window in your home. The quote what he said to Cicely is, it's written across the front of the building. It's not a window, but it's part of the actual makeup of the building. It's also like a stone in the bottom. So he really has come that full circle, and that, and hopefully he knew that was his kind of legacy in his last few months.
Yeah, I think he knew. And I'm working on, another paper that's for some reason all of my research is on like death and these days, which is great. But he of course needs her. Like in order for his meaning to manifest, he needs her to do it. He needs her to take his gift seriously. And I think that's a really important thing. Like at the end of life, we need other people in the ways that Cicely is doing in hospice, but also in terms of like contributing because our body, like we're gone, and then we need the living to carry out the project, if you will. And so she does that. And to me, the story is so amazing because it really shows how the living is tasked with sorting out and carrying on the people who come before us if they give us the honor, of doing so. And I think he like understood that she's the kind of person that's going to take this seriously. And here we go. And I think it's just an incredible story. I want to this is an aside, but perhaps someone listening or one of you, I don't know if you knew, Hannah, that David Clark actually wrote a play. Are you aware that he wrote a play called David and Cecily? Yeah. Yes. And it premiered at an Edinburgh Play Festival. And there's, some little, if you go to the show resources page, the entire clip, the David Clark clip that I played, comes from a longer YouTube video that's focused on end of life and hospice and so forth. And in that, he talks about this play that he wrote called David and Cecily. And they're showing it at a medical school as part of like medical humanities and in Spain, I believe. It's in Spanish. But point being, there is a play about this, and I love this story because it's about both people coming together, a commitment being brought to life by both people. I also want to add that, like going back to Randy's thing about like our zeitgeist, this it came up first when we were talking about mind together with heart, right? That both wisdom and compassion. I also want to give a nod to Abraham Maslow. You may have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and if you like go a little bit deeper, he goes into what he calls B needs or meta needs, which in the quote I read earlier, spiritual needs. These are like we have needs of the body, we need to eat and we need rest, but there are spiritual needs. And apart from the ancient Greeks, who clearly are talking about this kind of thing, it's not until, as far as I know, Abraham Maslow who's really talking about spiritual needs and pathologies that can develop. For example, he says, you have a need for truth. You have a need for beauty. He says you have a need for meaning. And if these needs are not met, you're going to suffer pathologies. And therefore we need, like, he doesn't use the phrase philosophical caregiving or philosophical counseling, but he's talking about that kind of thing. And I think that, Dame Saunders is helping to push this total picture of the human being, that we're mind and spirit doesn't necessarily mean soul that survives bodily death, or doesn't necessarily mean like religious. It's a life force with needs other than food. And I just wanted to give a nod to Abraham Maslow, because I think when we think of like Dame Saunders, Viktor Frankl, Abraham Maslow, we have a really nice framework with which to think about life and death. And as she says, a society which shuns the dying must have an incomplete philosophy. So it's so half-baked if you don't give a proper due to thinking about dying. So she rounds out Maslow and Frankl that way.
Well, and so I'll jump in there just because, it's one of these things where death becomes the logical place it's like the forcing function, which now, okay, the being must address this set of concerns. Like, it's not a maybe. Like, no, this is a hard deadline. And like questions of faith become paramount, questions of duty and questions of legacy and questions of memory, and there's all like the sorting out, right? But the hinge for me is this, and I use faith on purpose right now. It's like this bridge between the finite and the infinite, and like there's a reaching out and a participation in the finite presence as part of an infinite project. And so getting the person in the frame of reference and stepping into that grand project is like the ceremony of death that we all participate in. And so it's like the most amazing thing that there's now this framework around that moment and around that experience, and a way to prepare for that in a way that like we're now taking seriously as a society because of a few important people. And so it's just spectacular to me.
Indeed. And this forcing to like take things seriously, no time like the present, because one of my favorite death stories that I'm in these days is the story of Jeremy Bentham, and I'm sure everybody in London knows this Jeremy Bentham corpse story, and he changed his will. Like, this wasn't his will to do this with his body, but he changed his will a number of times. And the metaphor that I use, it's similar to, the bags packed. It's like, you could go through before the big date, or if you will, or before the big party, you can try on a number of different outfits. But at the end, the clock strikes and you've got to go out of the house with a specific outfit. And the more time that you spend curating these selections, the better off you are. And so she says that too. Cicely Saunders says, the living need the dying to remind them of like what's important, the eternal questions of life. And this is like not a small task. This is not something to leave to the last minute, if you will, or for those of us who are procrastinators. And so, yeah, I think that this is because people do change their mind. And in Bentham's case, he at first, in earlier drafts of his will, he specified, do not put me in a gray or black suit. He was very specific about the costume that his skeleton was wearing, and he specified no gray, no black. But at the end, he was like, I'm going with black. And so, like, he changes his mind about the very costume that his auto icon is wearing. And might he have changed it again if he had more time? Maybe. The clock, like the clock runs out. But I think it's good to give ourselves some margin to sort through all of these things, right? And that's the gift. Like that's like bringing, to your point, Hannah, like making more people aware of this. It's not just for the sake of having them learn about Cicely Saunders, which is everybody should know about the story, but for the sake of having people think about their mortality and begin working out, what's important and so forth.
I agree.
What she said.
Yes. Yeah. Where do I sign? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, I don't know, common sense. But let me play this clip from Viktor Frankl. This comes from a larger clip on YouTube. You can watch this whole clip on our show resources page. And he's talking about death in this clip, Viktor Frankl.
The ultimate, I would take it, attitudinal value challenge that we all share is how we're going to face death. How do you prepare people for that? How do you prepare yourself for that?
I couldn't prepare anyone else unless I would have prepared myself. Because if you are a psychiatrist, your patients feel exactly whether or not you are really convinced of what you are teaching and telling them. Now, I'm convinced that in contrast to the usual aspect, the albeit sound aspect to life, and more specifically to the past, to life's transitoriness, and this includes that we approach, each of us are approaching death. In contrast to that, I maintain that in the past nothing is lost, but right on the contrary, everything is stored forever. It is not annihilated by transitoriness, but on the contrary, it is becoming preserved forever. Something you have done can never be undone. Something you have experienced, something you have even experienced in a negative sense, going through suffering. And if you have, for instance, if you have gone through this suffering, honestly, courageously, and with dignity, who in the world, what in the world can annihilate this? What you have done has been done forever, in both ways, in a negative as in a positive way. It cannot be undone. And the past is a storehouse of what you have done, what you have experienced, what you have gone through, and what you have done out of all the negative and tragic aspects as even encountered within your life.
So that was Viktor Frankl. And again, you can watch that whole clip on our show resources page at virtuesofpeace.com. And this phrase that he uses, this storehouse of memories, you can't undo what has been done. And you have this whole reservoir, this storehouse of memories. And I think that goes nicely with some of the quotes that we were reading before about sorting out what is meaningful and what is not, and you have this residue, this reservoir, and you can't undo it, and you have to reckon with it at the end of life. And And that's amazing. He says it's both good and bad, and that's you. So this is the part of the show where we're going to wind things down and just give our final thoughts about Dame Cecily Saunders and her contribution, her philosophical caregiving, as I call it. And I'll just start by saying, and I've said it before, and I just want to reiterate that Dame Saunders is really giving us a complete philosophy of life, one that not only includes the fact of our ending, but also includes this notion of mental, spiritual, emotional pain that we've been talking about. There are really some, work that needs to be done with our concepts and with our practices, with our institutions. And she is working out a very complete philosophy of life, not just in her head theoretically through this scheme, but in reality through St. Christopher's and all of the other hospices that St. Christopher's has inspired. And so I want to, just end that. That's my summation. And Hannah, will start with you and then end with Randy.
Yes, I mean, I think I've very much come at Dame Cicely Saunders from the historical side rather than the philosophical side. But all round, I think it really does sort of mesh together. And I think she is just such an important person for everyone to learn about, whether it's just the basic facts, whether it makes you go and have a look at the hospice movement, about palliative care, because it's just such an important thing for people to talk about and be aware of. I mean, hospices are so common in the UK. Every area has their own sort of local hospice, which is a charity that'll run completely on charitable funds, but until you actually need to use one, you might not fully understand what they're there for, who they're there for, but knowing that this one absolutely incredible woman sort of broke through and pulled together all these ideas that seem so obvious, and actually did something about it and brought this whole movement to life that we're now benefiting from today.
Thank you. Randy?
So, for me, the takeaway is this new concentration on the most significant things, and the frame of reference becoming available more broadly to looking at life as this infinite project, as this overwhelmingly meaningful and like perpetual thing that we're all a part of, that we're all contributing to. And when you start to take death seriously, both for the individual and for the family, and this whole hospice project, the palliative care project, this whole thing, when you start to take it seriously, the amount of meaning that enters life changes in is an order of magnitude different change in the person's life. And so it's like there's something in there. There's this shiny, important thing that pulls us in and says, "Hey, this is significant. This makes a difference. This matters." And this single story and the characters in it, Cicely Saunders and like everybody that we talked about today, it's like there's this project. It matters. It's significant, and we're just growing into that as a collective. Our civilization has only been really interested in this for a very short period of time, and so what we're watching is the development of like a core curriculum around the significant things in life, which is available to everyone in a way that's new So that's the takeaway for me, is that like we're seeing something unfold from the very beginning. We're early times in this particular story.
So good. Yes. And I could say more, but I think it's time to close out this conversation. Thank you, Hannah, for joining us all the way from London. And thank you, Randy, for being here. And again, please look at our show resources page to do a deeper dive. If nothing else, yeah, this is a way for you to, as we've used this expression before, enter the forest of really powerful narratives. And if you have a chance, go look at the In Focus exhibit at the Florence Nightingale Museum. It comes down on March 1st, 2026, so you have some time. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day, good evening, and happy holidays.